What we're really doing today is storytelling. There's a lot to do with our farm transition that we're very much in process on. That's the beginnings of a farm transfer part. But we're hoping that this will be useful and help to start some productive conversation around the topic. I'm John Wepking. Our farm is Paul's farm is in Ridgeway, Wisconsin, and we're organic grain farmers and manage about 700 acres of crops and some pasture on top of that. We wanted to start with our mission statement. This was one thing that we kind of have worked on and put together, especially this winter. When you're involved in especially a non-family or multi-family, multi-generational farm enterprise that's shifting, we thought it was really important to articulate something. It's fairly straightforward, but to have something like that to rely on when you're making decisions is really valuable, we find. I suppose I can read it. Might as well read it in case anybody can't see it. We are farmers committed to cultivating a regenerative ecosystem by growing real food, improving the health and resilience of our soils, protecting the safety of our water, and investing in the vitality of our rural community. Our farm, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the region, is in the Driftless area, which is a sort of hilly, actually pretty remarkably hilly area in southwest Wisconsin, northeast Iowa, and southeast Minnesota that was unglaciated in the last ice age. And our farm is kind of in the foothills west of Madison as you kind of get into the region. And it creates really unique farming situations, a lot of soil conservation challenges, and also some opportunities that we've found, especially in growing food-grade small grains. We're a ridgetop farm in the Driftless. There tends to be ridgetop and valley farms, and as a ridgetop farm, we're pretty windswept and well drained, which opens up possibilities for food-grade small grains, even though we are a little bit higher rainfall. And that kind of guides our rotation. Obviously, we grow corn and beans, though we're attempting over time to reduce those acres because they are hard on our slopes. Our whole farm is highly erodible by FSA definition, so reducing those row crops is really helpful. Part of that is also trying to do as many acres in no-till, roller crimped rye for our organic soybeans. We do spring cereals, generally to seed down perennial legumes, either alfalfa or clover, that we use for to get a deep-rooted perennial in the rotation, but also for nitrogen for our following crops, winter wheat, and then corn. We generally frost seed clover back into the winter wheat, and then we have a second-year alfalfa credit plus a red clover plow down by the time it comes to corn. We've added buckwheat in the rotation after corn. We think it thrives really well there, though it has its marketing challenges as a grain crop. And then we also grow rye, spelt, and some other ancient grains, and pasture as well, which we think is really critical in our landscape, especially with our slopes, to really reintegrating that into the ecosystem. There's a really long history of animals on pasture in the farm, but we'll get into that with Paul's history in a little bit. With all of the diverse grains we grow, the way that we're really directing the farm right now is toward value added with the food grade grains. So we received a value added producer grant, and we're a partner on a conservation innovation grant that have both helped us to establish a toll milling relationship with a local miller. So right now we're basically contracting a local miller to mill grain for us that we sell as flour. But the next step for us is building our own farmer-owned flour mill, and we're definitely looking for partners if anyone's interested in milling flour. in that effort. That's kind of that's been our current stumbling block. On our farm directly, we've really invested, and we'll get into this later, in drying, storage, cleaning, dehulling for spelt infrastructure on our farm, so that we're able to take grain off the combine and get it, store it well, dry it well, get it clean for food grade customers, anywhere from a distiller to a miller to a baker to a chef. So that's the direction our farm is headed in general. And Paul's going to give a little bit of a background on his story.
Okay, my story started out with my dad back in 1953 when I was born. Prior to 1953, he was a dairy farmer that had a milk route, and he delivered milk to the local community, which eventually surrounded his farm. I went to college not thinking I was ever going to be a farmer, but he made a deal with me that, if I come back, that I could set up with him a partnership, that we would expand and work together for a bit. This picture is what my dad's homestead looked like. It's now completely surrounded by a village or city. My siblings got this property because my dad and I invested in. We invested into a new facility in another location. I was 25 years old and we bought a farm, built a greenfield dairy, and before I knew it, I was $1 million in debt, and it hasn't changed. The equity has changed a lot, but through the history of our farm, we'd had one of the first modern new dairy confinement facilities back in 1978. It just wasn't working very well, and about 1992, we looked at each other and thought, this thing gonna go. Called in some experts, and they said, yep, you keep doing the same thing, you're gonna lose it. And that was when rotational grazing came out to the Midwest. And everybody thought I was crazy, but I put the cows out to the pasture and learned the techniques of rotational grazing, and they got healthy. And we were able to survive another economic turndown because production costs were so low on the summer grazing that we were able to get through in the winter. Worked so well that we increased the acreage from the local farm that you saw on the previous slide to a satellite farm just for milking cows. It had a milking shed there. It was a kind of popular thing. We put a roof over a milking setup and left the sidewalls open and the ends open, and only used it during the summertime. We had an interesting dilemma when I had gotten a startup grant from the state of Wisconsin, the Department of Ag, to do a demonstration project. It got to be a time where I was looking to it was all constructed, ready to go, and they had to come out and do an inspection. They said, this ain't going to pass inspection. I said, well, why not? Well, because you got to have doors. I said, well, I don't need doors on a milking parlor. And what do you need doors for? He says, well, we got to have doors when you do a clean in place in the pit. You leave your units there and clean in place. So what's the options? He said, well, you can take all the units and put them in the milk house and clean them. I said, well, that doesn't sound like a very good option. What's the other option? He said, I don't know. You're not going to get it from me. And I said, talk to the supervisors. And I got up to the top inspector in the state, and he said, nope, ain't going to give you grade A. I said, well, it's a stupid rule. It had something to do with interstate commerce. And I said, well, if it's stupid, we both agreed it was a stupid rule. But since he's a bureaucrat, he wasn't going to change it. And I said, well, how do you change that rule? He said, well, I don't know, talk to Secretary of Agriculture. So I wrote him a letter, carboned it to the governor, and within a week I had a provisional permit. And what they were going to follow was sediment, because there was no question that we were going to make the somatic cell count work, but they wanted to make sure there wasn't any blowing dust during the cleaning process. I mean, we were all grass pasture. I mean, blowing dust like a desert? Yeah, right, okay. So we got some, we opened the door for these kind of cheap, low-input parlors. The governor had an initiative at the time in Wisconsin. It's called Dairy 2020, and his vision was that we should extend money to farmers to creative and new innovative ideas and strengthen the business of agriculture. So that's the kind of wordage I went in the letter. I says, if you're really serious about your program, you should allow this project. And it's, one floor of your department gave me the money, the other floor says it doesn't work. Figure it out. And later on, a few years later, I met the governor's assistant, and he said, Paul, when that letter came in, he caused me a lot of work. And I said, well, the governor held the letter up and says, Kevin, make this go away. And so that was my renegade status at the time, and enjoyed doing that. Milked a lot of cows, so we got to about 750 cows at the peak. They had 1,100 acres under grass, rotational grazing. And then always wondered why one parlor worked better than the other one. Finally, I had hired so many people in the dairy. One gal says, you got stray voltage. I says, well, power company says they don't have stray voltage. Well, you got to call this electrician, and you better call this lawyer. So then we found out that, we did have an untenable situation. It was coming off the utility. So we went 8 years developing a case that was went to circuit court. Bizarre results. We were told that the jury found a verdict of guilty and negligence, but they gave me nothing for a damage settlement. So it was like, okay, we're not doing dairy anymore. So we sold the cows in 2011. Converted the buildings to hay storage and machinery storage, and then a week before I interviewed these guys, we had a nice fire and burned it all down. And I didn't light it, but it was an unfortunate situation. It cost us a lot of money. The fire marshal had come out and wanted to investigate for arson. I said, if you think I lit this, I didn't, because I just cut my insurance from $750,000 to $250,000. Why would I light my own barn? So, anyways, now we're making lemon out of lemonade. This is all cleaned up now. It's got a nice building site for a flour mill or other extended buildings as we progress along. Okay. So, yeah, the important thing here is my dad had a farm that was, paid up and free and clear, and he was willing to stick his neck out, mortgage that to get the down payment for our other farm that we built into the dairy. As it went along, when I started rotational grazing was when he started his exit plan. Before, we were partners along the way in a corporation, and when I started rotational grazing, he thought I was nuts. So he wanted me to buy out. He wanted me to buy him out. So at the time, his land was worth about 4 times what my value was in my farm. So we decided as a family that I would inherit my farm in Ridgeway, and his farm then would be split to the other kids. It's kind of an unequal but equal basis. I was okay with it. He was helping me along either way, and so my 2 brothers and 2 sisters are going to get his real estate, and he's been gone for 10 years, but it's really valuable next to the city, and I got the farm in Ridgeway as my inheritance. I do have a son who wants to work on a farm, but he doesn't want any part of running it, managing it. He likes the low stress life. He's not motivated by stress. John and I we work pretty good together. So my son Levi is going to have a lifetime tenancy, and it's important that John understands that. Okay.
Hello, I'm Halle. So John and I ended up meeting in this basement kitchen in New York City at a restaurant called Prune. he is from Southwest Wisconsin. He's from Lancaster, where his family has had a farm for the last about 100 years. But we met cooking, and as our relationship developed, it was clear that we didn't want to stay in New York City, or we had to ask ourselves that question. And John at one point said that his dream was to go back to his family farm and try to take it over. And I was like, that sounds great. Let's go. And so we actually ended up running a restaurant in Lancaster while also working on his family's farm. And we tried, so his family's farm is owned by his dad and his 3 siblings. So it's a partnership that had already been strained by the time we showed up, and us kind of pushing them and trying to figure out if they were serious about passing it on and how to manage that piece of land. We encountered a lot of resistance. And I don't know if you can see, but that's me on the Yanmar 8 months pregnant. And I knew, we moved from New York, we moved from Brooklyn, and we moved to be farmers. We didn't want to be working full-time jobs and farming on the side, especially not in the situation where we didn't even know if we had a future on this piece of land. And that very day that this picture was taken, I went on Craigslist because I was committed. I knew that we didn't want to raise our kid in a restaurant. We wanted to raise our kid on a farm. We moved here to do this work, and I went on Craigslist and I typed in organic in the Madison area Craigslist, and there were a lot of minimum wage picking weeds in CSA farm job postings, and then there was Paul's posting, which is this, which you can read or not. But basically, the home farm that John's family had was about 250 acres. It was a grass-based cattle operation with a little bit of cropland, but that was the kind of farming that we were interested in. We knew that we didn't want to be vegetable CSA farmers. We wanted to farm in this way. And so when we found Paul's listing where he says, that he had this wealth of knowledge that he wanted to pass on to the next generation, that a partnership could be possible, these values that he articulated, really lit a spark in me, and I wrote him back immediately. And a few days or a week or so later, we ended up having our first meeting with Paul. And in that first meeting, we were driving around his farmland, and he said, if you come to work for me, I expect you to tell me what I'm doing wrong and, bring new ideas. And he was serious. He has held up to that. He obviously, as you've heard, he's gone through many different transitions on his own personal farm, and he is an amazingly flexible and open, experienced farmer. So we are very lucky to have landed in this position.
So that was in 2015. So we're going on, I guess, 3.5 years. This next year will be, I kind of think of it in terms of seasons, because when I came on and worked, it was just before our first child, Henry, was born. And that was in August, and that was in July. So I spent the whole first month cultivating soybeans with it.
While Paul was cleaning up the fire.
Yeah, while Paul was cleaning up the barn fire, with a tractor that was, I don't know, double the horsepower of anything I'd ever driven, and 12 rows. And it was a really challenging first month, and there were some rocky patches, but luckily Paul was too busy with the barn fire to see how many soybeans I killed. But since then, in that first fall, and this is still pretty remarkable to me, I was able to convince him to plant 40 acres of winter wheat, which wasn't at all in his rotation. But each year that we've worked together and Paul's respected our ideas and and wanted to bring them to the table and really started to buy into the food grade small grains thing. I mean, we come from that a lot with our restaurant and baking backgrounds. You know, from the beginning, we've really worked together on a lot of those things to where very quickly we were in more of a, I mean, we were farm hands working for a wage, but in terms of the relationship, we were very much partners. So the transition framework that we have now is very much in process, but we're fairly confident in it. So the next slides are just going to kind of go through that and what we're doing to try to transition this, because it's a serious amount of money and assets. It's about 600 acres is the actual owned land base, I think, and then all of the equipment that goes along with that. So our goal, we're leveraging FSA beginning farmer resources so that Halle and I can build equity. That's so far we've done a micro loan for breeding cattle. So we have our own grass-fed beef enterprise that is on the farm. And then also we're working toward purchasing the 82-acre farmstead where we live on the farm. The idea is that we're going to earn some combination of earning, gifting, and purchasing stock in the corporation over time, so that instead of a real estate transaction and purchasing the equipment, there will just be a stock ownership transfer.
Bickford Farms is set up as an S corp, so there are shares. It's not an LLC. That's kind of an important structure.
And then, so the trade-off there is that, obviously, and Paul will speak to this more, our goal is to limit our debt coming in and try to avoid a large, real estate transaction. And so the trade-off there is then the farm is basically, pension maybe isn't exactly the right technical term, but our commitment is that we'll basically provide a pension for Paul for the rest of his life. And this is where, what we're doing is a pretty committed relationship, not just a transaction. We'll get into this later, but I mean, we're involved in conversations about long-term care and provisions for his children. And, we're really becoming a family in a lot of ways. And the stock transfer realistically wouldn't be accomplished within Paul's lifetime. So then there's the remainder of the stock is probably, the way we're looking at it now, going to be transferred through Paul's estate. And then again, we'll make provisions so that the farm is sheltered from long-term care needs should Paul need that or anything like that. And so, as the benefits and responsibilities that we speak to in the bottom is really critical here. When you do a relationship based transition like this, there's a lot of benefits, especially we would have no shot with basically the zero equity that we came in with to be farming on this scale and to have this kind of impact, but there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that relationship. This is sort of gives you an idea of the land base. That's the town of Ridgeway in the middle there. The two purple blobs are the land that's actually owned by Bickford Farms. I don't know. Yeah, you can see that pretty well. Most of our land is owned, which for organic is nice because we have long-term land tenure, but the land costs are quite high. We do have some rented farmland that abuts our west farm. And then this red patch is the 82 acres that we're right now working with FSA. They have a beginning farmer loan that, oh yeah, next slide, there you go. Where you put 5% down, you can get 45% of it as a loan from FSA at really, I think it's about 1.5% interest. And then the remaining half is a land contract that we're working out directly with Paul. That 82 acres, which also is at this point, a really nice house. We'll get into the details, but Paul borrowed substantially to rehab a vacant farmhouse on the farm. So between that and the land base, it's a little over $600,000. And so that gets split in those percentages. And the crop sales off of that portion of the farm plus the beef enterprise growing, we've budgeted we'll be able to make those payments. And then also there's a lot in this relationship that we're able to take advantage of a lot of, we make a lot of hay. There's always the dirty bales at the bottom of stacks. There's pasture land that's not going managed because Paul didn't have his own cattle. So we don't pay any money for the hay that we consume for the most part because it's mostly the unsaleable or deeply discounted stuff. We tend to haul hay 75 to 100 miles sometimes, and so there's a substantial cost in delivery. So sometimes there is hay where the dollars and cents make sense, even if the farm's not going to make any money off of it, to keep it here and feed it to our cattle.
Okay, I mentioned earlier that my relationship with my dad was that he would borrow the money and I would pay it back. And I remember that conversation directly, and he reminded me a few times as we were losing equity monthly. He would come down and rattle my cage a few times and said, "I'm doing the best I can," And but that worked out pretty well, and that's what we're doing here. I'm highly leveraged. We're judicious about how we borrow money. It's one thing if you can borrow it, but you have to have a good plan to pay it back. And my first year's transitioning into organic, I hit the high mark of $14 corn, $32 soybeans. Did that 2 years in a row, and I thought, oh, this is easy. And then the imports were coming in, and the prices were sliding, and we were down into $8, $9 corn and $18 beans like they are now. And that's when John and Halee walked in, and I said, "John, you got anything to bring?" And he says, "I got $20 in my wallet." And I said, "Well, you got any ideas?" He said, "Yep." So we worked on his ideas. We went, carefully structured. My debts were, were there, but he needed to have a house, and we had a location with an old rundown home, and Halee's dad is a carpenter, came up. John's dad is a plumber and an engineer, so we had some family capital, family help on rebuilding a house that still costs $250,000 borrowed money, but that's a good investment. I figured if I could put that much money in a house and our partnership falls apart, I'll still have a really nice house. And so there was no risk. We always talk about the risk of risk avoidance. And my risk, if they leave, I'm going to be set with a farm that I can't run, because they've changed it so much. I don't know so much about the grain cleaning and the grain growing as John does. And if I leave, well, I'm not going to leave, but you know how it is. But we got a good relationship that way. So we the change of paradigm came along slowly, but the expenses or the capital expenses of following that grain, the small grain business. We bought a lot of used equipment, used bins, did a lot of farm labor, put stuff up, but it still costs a bunch of money, and I'm more worried about borrowing for operating money than I am capital investments. The capital investments are always going to be there. These bins can be taken down again and sold again, or somebody else can come in and use it as a grain storage. But so now I can still borrow some more money, but the business plan doesn't allow it to get paid back. So we have to be careful on that.
So obviously we have a pretty unique relationship, and sometimes people ask us how, what could we share with others? How can this be applied to other situations? And for us in this moment, we are working out the details, and hopefully we will have a very clear path for our, very specific situation that we're happy to share with others. But what it comes down to is this focus on these values. So the first one obviously is mentorship and trust. then commitment, and a shared vision. And when it comes, I don't know, when it comes to our dynamic, obviously we have some details of these, but just like, the mentorship thing, we wouldn't be able to do anything like what we are doing at all without Paul. We wouldn't be able to have the equipment, the capital, the skills, the support. And then when it comes to trust, Paul trusts that we're not going to leave. We trust that he'll continue to support us, even if we have crazy ideas. And the commitment, that comes with the trust. But I don't know why John and I said, yes, of course, we'll do this, and we'll stay here. And especially as millennials who are seen as being so transient, and people who have 5 or more careers. We came to farming probably with 3 under our belts, 3 previous careers already. So I guess we settled into this one, but also coming up with a shared vision and us all being on the same page and being able to see our future and know where we want to go together.
I got 2 comments to make here on the shared vision. Sometimes we have a basis of disagreement here. We all of us know where we want to be, but how fast do we get there? I tend to be, right now, a little faster motivated to get to the end point than John and Halee, because they're more conservative, because it's going to be their debt and it's going to be their neck, and I want to get down their road, and I want to be the powerhouse regional flower king, So, and these guys are going to take it slow. So we have a they're my brakes on my accelerator, and I'm their brakes on their accelerator. So we work pretty well that way. The key point that I want to make sure you all understand is that not everybody's going to pull off an arrangement like this, especially if you're an older fellow like me and you're just kind of set in your ways. You're going to hire on somebody and think they're going to be a partner. If you don't give them some responsibility in some areas where they can trip up and fail, you're not going to get anywhere. You can't just hire somebody and continue to do the same thing over and over, because that's not what these young kids want to make their own way. And sorry, I call you young kids, but I was young once too. And but you have to be really open-minded to listen to their ideas and focus on things that you don't even know about, because they have some knowledge base. They have some creative ideas. Some of them sounded like so crazy that I couldn't believe it. But, what I was doing was just going to be the same old. And I've never been one to like the status quo. My basic personality lends me towards a chaos manager. And so if things are relatively smooth and dice and smooth on the farm, then I'll stir up trouble and make more excitement. But with John and Halee, they're the slow and steady people that keep this going. But yeah, the older generation, you really have to let yourself go and think about: are you going to be better off, or are you going to be equal in economics? If you do something that makes you better, you want to do that. If you do something that doesn't make you any worse, you can still do that. But you don't ever want to take on something that's going to drive you in a hole. But so at the worst case, I'm not going to lose any equity or money on this business here. In the best case, it's going to flourish. And because we're watching together the financial progress of the farm, and we invest judiciously in capital and structure and in the business going forward, and bringing in equity partners if we have to, and that kind of stuff. It's not going to be my money that's going to take a hurt, because we're doing something together. So I had all this experience, and I started thinking, well, what am I going to do with it? It doesn't do any good in the afterlife. So I wanted to be able to share it and let John and Halee use some of my experience that I paid dearly to learn. I made thousands of dollars worth of mistakes that I'm trying to keep them from doing again. And you learn fast when you got a lot of money on the line. So John was pretty clumsy that first summer. He didn't know much about machinery, and he had to be, I even taught him things about animals, but by and large, the animal enterprise is his alone, and I'm glad he gets a chance to learn on his own on that one. But I went organic because my dad had Parkinson's, and Parkinson's was brought on by the organophosphates that we used in the 70s. So I just didn't want to use any more chemicals, and it's a value-based deal here, and you can all do whatever you want out there. But for us, we want to present ourselves as clean and green going forward.
Trust and commitment. We talked a little bit about this before, but pretty early on, Paul was pretty willing to give us a fair amount of responsibility. First in managing rotation, crop planning, soils. We're actually in the middle of totally kind of revamping our soils program, and restarting that in a way that I think is going to be more productive. Halee in 2018 really took the reins of QuickBooks and the bookkeeping, and that's been a real education. I'm sure we could do a whole session just on that, but no, everyone would fall asleep. And then the grants administration side, which I've really taken on, which especially with the VAPG grants is substantial. And our compensation is, we have a base wage. But again, the benefits of having access to pasture, Paul's got, I don't know how many miles of high tensile wire spooled up all over the place from having 1,100 acres of pasture in the 90s. So we take advantage of a lot of older equipment lying around, things that when you come onto an existing farm, there's so much valuable stuff there when you're not starting from, good junk that actually really, the difference between, going to Farm and Fleet and buying all that stuff and just having it there, obviously there's a lot more sweat equity, laying out high tensile wire, moving it from one part of the farm to the other, but that stuff is all really, really critical. And up until now, until we've figured out the FSA loan for our house, we've lived in that house rent free. And it's just been, part of our wage. We're right now we're committing more and we're adding more value than the actual paycheck we're earning. And so a lot of that compensation is based on those non-monetary things. And so again, so the house part was really critical in terms of commitment, because once Paul was willing to do that, and again, being an existing farmer with a land base and assets and equity that he could tap, it was easy for him to borrow the money to fix up this old house. And then we went from, I had been commuting from Lancaster, which is about an hour one way, to do farm work with a baby at home. That was a pretty rough year. Plus, that was a huge difference to have us on the farm. And now a couple of years later, we're going to be paying that back. So that's, it takes a really strong relationship to be able to make those kinds of decisions with clear eyes. So, and Paul, we talked about his son Levi. He's about our age. That's part of the deal too. Levi's really valuable and employable on the farm, but it would be a challenge for him to do non-farm work. So for Paul to have the security that Levi will continue to have a job when he's gone on this land is really important.
Sure. So, our last value that we listed was a shared vision. And so, Paul talked about when we came to work for him, he was growing organic row crops and alfalfa hay. And And when we came with our restaurant backgrounds, we wanted to grow food for people too, not just animals. And so we actually had a model of some farmers in upstate New York that we were introduced from the farmers market in New York City. And also we have a local stone mill who was encouraging farmers to grow small grains and giving them access to this food grade market. And so when we were in Lancaster, we tried to contact him and say, like, we want to grow small grains for you. And he did not take us seriously. And then when we started to work for Paul and we said, we have almost 1,000 acres, we want to grow small grains for you, he's like, great. And so now we're like hit 80% of his organic supply or something like that. So that relationship has really opened the door for us because, as Paul said, if he continued to farm, and he has said this in the past too, if he continued to farm the way that he was, he wouldn't be he'd probably quit. He'd stop farming. And so for us, we needed to figure out a way to add value to the farm so that we can support Paul in his retirement and us as our family. And we're very committed to, they say like farming into the middle class. We're committed to showing that you don't have to have an off-farm job, that you can find, that you can make your farm strong enough so that it can support you financially. And so that's what we're committed to. And part of that too is adding livestock back onto the farm. We have 21 breeding cows in a bull and 2 years worth of calves that we're getting ready the first year to send to market, or they're reaching market weight. And, I think when we look at the farm, we see all of these opportunities. We have sugar maples. We could grow sorghum for pressing into syrup. We would really like to recruit somebody to have a honey operation as we're growing more buckwheat because bees are so critical. And there's land that could be farmed for vegetables too. So as I think young farmers, we see a lot of opportunity and a lot of flexibility in our land, and we welcome cooperation and partnership that, this is all part of the long-term vision. Right now, obviously, we are just trying to get rooted and make what we're doing successful, and we can go from there. But I think basically our goal, as we said, is to create a flexible, adaptable, resilient farm. So we're investing a lot in soil health. We're aware that we might have to change what we're doing in the future, but we're being smart about the investments that we're making and making sure that it doesn't lock us into a certain paradigm, that we're going to be able to withstand, weather events and everything else that might come our way.
So this last slide is sort of conclusions, I think, and ways that we can see how our situation can help other people that are in. I mean, every farm transition is so unique, but there are certain ways, and especially in the relationship building and mindset, that I think are really valuable. I mean, we see such a value in taking an existing operation and helping that operation evolve. It gives real peace of mind to the retiring generation, and there's just innumerable real benefits as a beginning farmer to be coming onto a farm that's already living, breathing, and working, as opposed to starting from scratch and just looking for a piece of land. In our case, being flexible about the location of that farm and the community that you're putting yourself in, because obviously it's a very long-term commitment. It's a lifetime commitment, the way we see it. We moved about an hour to the east of where we were living in my hometown. For us, it was a pretty easy, we had to sell a house. We had to close a restaurant. I mean, there there was a lot of hard conversations in that summer in 2015, but it put us, an hour closer to Madison, an area that has a really a lot of great small towns that have pretty vibrant communities, so that we felt that instead of, the real liberating moment for us was kind of giving up on my family's home farm. It was the farm that I always envisioned. But the biggest opportunity came when we realized that my father was on board, but his siblings weren't. And we could be doing non-farm work and waiting 15 years. And by that time, then then we got to be looking for retirement. So to just make that decision that it was more important to be farming soil in general than a particular patch of soil really opened up this possibility for us, and was hugely impactful in our farming careers. The next 2 points about there's so few farmers left in this country. We all know this, that there's so few farm kids, and it just seems to me and to us that we need to start looking to non-farm kids to recruit farmers and stewards of land. And we found that, where we're lacking in certain skills and welding and things like that, that really would have been helpful to come into the business with. There's a lot, because of our experiences in the places we'd lived and the kind of work we'd done, there's a lot of skills that are intangible that we do bring into farming that really can help guide decision making. But it's difficult to find, our life up until this farming moment was very different than what Paul's life was. And so to find the common ground and to see where each of our skills are important and how we can work together was really important. And where we see our role going forward, almost more than anything, is, and what I'd like to do, is to really advocate for formal apprenticeship programs for especially organic grain farmers. I don't think it necessarily has to be organic, but grain farmers in general. Find opportunities to get young aspiring farmers in tractor seats, earning wages, working on living, breathing farms before they go into debt. Because I think that especially for young people that didn't grow up directly on a farm and that lack those mechanical skills, that time is really, really critical to helping understand and appreciate just whether or not the lifestyle really fits for you. And obviously key to that is that not all of these relate. It's not as though if we create apprenticeship programs, then all of a sudden it's going to create a bunch of partnerships like the one that Halee and I have with Paul, but at least it gets retiring farmers and beginning farmers thinking about what they need, what their goals are, what they are looking for in a partner. And through those relationships and programs, we think that other relationships like this can develop. And then again, helping to, like we're trying to do by doing this sort of like gifted, purchased stock and funding a pension structure to try to create transition plans like that can help limit the cost of entry and the debt for younger generations looking to get into farming. And that's what we have for content. So we've saved a good amount of time for questions. I hope we've sparked some ideas or yeah.
I was just curious on how many responses you got from your Craigslist ad and what was your process of selecting which ones you answered?
My ad was listed for almost a year, I believe. I had a sprinkling of interest from people who were definitely not qualified. They were looking more for a produce type thing, or someone raised 12 chickens in their backyard and thought that was a farming experience. They came from all over the place. John and Halee were the closest ones in Wisconsin, but it was a very carefully worded and structured ad that it was easy to ferret out the individuals who weren't going to fit, or that were underqualified. In my dairy career, I probably hired 200 people because, with the stray voltage problem, we had it was it was a crazy place to work, and used to hire people by experience. Thought I could fill those positions. It didn't much matter, if they didn't like it, they left, no matter what the experience. And finally, I got to the point where I'm just going to hire nice people and train them myself. And nice people, you can't teach nice. You can't teach respect. You can't teach, your values. So you hire people like that, and certainly you have to have a partner like that.
Yeah, the question is, what does the legal structure of the transition look like being an S corp, and I think by the end of this winter we'll have a lot of those things figured out. We have a framework basically, but it's right now honestly in the emailing back and forth with our attorney and accountant and figuring all of that out. But I think Paul, you can speak.
Yeah, my framework is a little clumsy because when my dad and I went into our transition, his transition out and mine in, LLCs weren't around yet. So we had a choice of partnership or whatever. And so we decided on a corporation. And that's been clumsy and difficult, but it's served our purpose. And what the problem is now, essentially everything I own personally is shares of Bickford Farms, Inc. And the corporation should never own land, but it does, and so we're stuck with that. And so the basic idea when set up with my dad was I would buy shares from him, and then that would be cash in his pocket, and that would be money that he could have on his retirement. And so basically the same thing's going to happen here. In fact, the thing about the gifting is that we have to realize that if we had 100% indebtedness, the business plan wouldn't work. We couldn't make enough money to pay it all off. So what are we going to do with the other 50%, for example? I can bank owns 50% of everything I have, and to ask John and Halee to take over those payments plus pay me the other 50% was incredibly crazy. So what we're going to do is, just have them pay for it over a long period of time as we create more profitable enterprises.
Can you talk a little bit about your partnership with your bank and through this process, because I'm sure it's unique to them as well, and what challenges have you seen?
Yeah, I won't name the lender, but they do promote young farmers and this and that. But you got to be in the gold medal rating loan before you start bringing in somebody else, because if you're on a shoestring already, then you want to go borrow money for a house, or you want to put in a whole different setup. We got some pushback. And I think that our lender of choice in the future will probably be commercial banks, or it will be investment funds, or it'll be impact investments, socially conscious people who follow what we do, that want to help us. A lot of people out there have more money than everybody in this whole meeting here, but and they want to put something to use. They want to go to their cocktail parties and talk about it and feel warm and fuzzy that they're helping somebody. And so we take advantage of that. We've got one loan that we just got bought a piece of real estate for us. It's a socially conscious type investing group that provided some mortgage money for us.
wife and I are facing a similar kind of situation. We have 2 farms. We have a son interested. We have 4 children. So there's 3 siblings that are not interested in coming back to the farm. Although the one who works at Blue Hill Farms restaurant in New York should probably come back to the farm. But so just those kind of road. I mean, we're in the process of transferring units between all 4 children. But interested in some of those kind of things.
Yeah, so the first question was, why did I go to New York in the first place if I was interested in farming? And the second was talking about a larger question about siblings and families and dealing with equity in that way between farm and non-farm heirs, siblings, children that have a break between whether or not they're interested in farming or not. I had sort of a cyclical path. I got a liberal arts degree from Grinnell College, Central Iowa. I, at that point, realized that I really wanted to be doing something less academic and more impactful. And from that world, for some reason, the closest I got there was I got a master's degree in urban planning, and then in UW Milwaukee, and then I moved to New York and worked in affordable housing development in New York City for about 3 years. And it was working in that cubicle in New York that I realized I couldn't do that. It's spiritually, I didn't feel healthy. There was just nothing about it. It just took me a long time to figure that out. So that was kind of the top. And then I went via cooking, because in New York, that's a pretty remarkable world to be a part of. And it was really amazing to work for the chefs and bakers that we both got to work for. But then at a certain point in restaurants in New York, especially if you don't come from, if you're just normal middle-class kids, and you don't have a lot of family resources, it becomes pretty difficult to really move up in those ranks in that environment. And we at that point, we somehow reached the conclusion that we wanted to be farming. And so we moved from Brooklyn to Lancaster, Wisconsin in a U-Haul, and haven't looked back from there. The siblings thing is really interesting, because I think Paul's situation was fortuitous in that there was that situation of the home farm being clearly in the development path in Prairie du Sac. And so that wasn't going to be a farm in the future. So there was a really pretty easy demarcation of Paul being the one child who was interested in farming. Well, they were able to leverage, Melvin's equity to get Paul started on a farm. That became his inheritance. And the other siblings were able to cash in on the real estate development of the home farm in Prairie du Sac. In the situation of my family, or my dad's family, there was a clunky and not well constructed legal partnership that he and his 3 siblings put together in the early 80s when they bought the farm from my grandfather. And there wasn't enough attention paid to management versus ownership and how decisions would be made. And after a certain period of time, there really was no operator. And the farm's just kind of been in semi-operational disrepair ever since. I mean, there was a period of CRP. There's always been some cattle, but it grew to dysfunction pretty quickly because there was really no one who was willing to full-time be that farmer.
And then John's dad did try to take over the farm, but his siblings weren't interested. They were happy with their CRP check. And so he kind of went rogue on him, which probably didn't help the relationship or our chances at taking over the farm. But in the end, he has since left the partnership, and he's actually working on our farm now. So it's still a family operation for us in that way.
Yeah, and to speak, I think if I can speak generally on that topic, I think it does seem, and we were talking about this yesterday when we were preparing, that when you do have a situation where there's one child who wants to farm and children that don't, it's that there's such a difficult fine line between viewing, because once a farm, and this is maybe me speaking a little too generally, is owned by, say, a group of siblings, none of which want to farm, then the farm isn't a farm, it's an asset, And what we're really fighting against is viewing the farm as an asset. We want to see the farm as a piece of land that needs to be stewarded and farmed. And our the fact that the land has underlying value, we have to deal with that. But that's not the goal, is to have a chunk of land that has X value to our name. And it's really, I think that's almost the most difficult thing, because in your situation, how do you create equity for the you know what I mean? What does the inheritance become for the children that don't want to farm? Do you put them in a situation where they have to, over time, maybe have the farming child buy out their shares so they do get that inheritance over time? I don't know. It's a really difficult situation, but it seems like families where they've been able to come up with creative strategies so that the child who wants to farm can totally control that farm, makes it so much easier for that child to look at their next generation, which is really difficult in those situations in terms of fairness.
I think one of the things you guys all talked about, and that is building strong relationships, exists between our kids right now.
Yeah.
What we're is at, and we may be dead and long gone by that time, because I'm a little older than Paul. So, and I guess what we worry about, what happens when that strong relationship isn't there and the other kids are looking at value and not looking at what is our son making for them.
Yeah.
Sure.
Paying them for their shares through his work and stuff. So I guess those are the things we worry about.
My suggestion would be that the value of the farm should be frozen at a certain point, and your farming son should then work on his share of that, and the other siblings do not get an increase in value as he's working, because he is doing all the damn work. Why do they get the freeload along? And that's not being unfair. It's being totally fair. And so at whatever point of time that you pick a point to create a zero-based value, all of the increased equity is should flow to your farming son or daughter or couple, then, because they're doing the work, they're making the choices, and they got the risk. I mean, John and Halee are going to get a disproportionate share of our growth. In fact, all of our growth on our farm is going to be directed towards them, because they saved my ass. Basically, they came in and they've changed my paradigm to make profitability. We're going to be wildly successful. I'm very confident of that. I mean, Anders, you keep laughing. Yeah, I think we're going to be a force to be reckoned with. We're into this. We're into what we're doing early, and we're good at it. And unless somebody with an unlimited amount of capital shows up real quickly, I think we're going to be the grain cleaners in the southern part of the state. We're going to be the millers eventually, and we'll have a good market share. And that's because of these guys. So they should get the benefit of that.
Well, that sounds like a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Halee, John, and Paul.
Thanks.